Sherry just came in with Dave, and okay, you're good. We've got it recorded. Oh, two people view in the waiting room. Okay. Oh, Julie Clumpy. I mean, I don't know if she's still in Hawaii. I thought maybe she's not. And Robin. Well, it's still Robin's getting on right now. If I can put her on here. It's the same one, and it bloomed, and those flowers died, but Scott cut those off, and they keep going. Yeah.
I don't know how there's enough stuff inside of there to grow that, but
yes. Is that the deal? Oh. Okay, we've got everybody. Julie, are you in Hawaii? You're muted. Sorry.
We just got back
Friday night.
Saturday morning early, so we're back.
There you go. Okay. Well, we were saying that we've got a lot of people that are in Mexico from the Arts Center, and it's Oyster Fest here, so it's crazy. So some people have family in from Oyster Fest. Okay, so we got it recording. Okay, I think we're okay. You got the proof.
I do, and some of you, I guess, stick with me. There are people that I normally check in with, and I have felt so bad. There have been some days that I look up and it's evening, and I don't know how we got there. And I feel like I'm doing a little better, but I haven't gotten to some people that I should have, but I apologize. I've done my best. Cheryl, and is Cheryl on this morning?
Yes, she is. Right there.
There she is.
Uh-huh.
I was thinking this week, and when people come to mind like that, I try and pick up the phone and give them a call. And Cheryl's just had a really bad week, haven't you? Yeah. And the medical stuff, the physical stuff just takes a toll. So keep Cheryl in your prayers. You have you have some concerns that you've had for a long time, but the pain, I guess it's sort of a theme amongst this group, is there's a lot of it. Kelly, I understand, is dealing with a lot of pain, and it just takes a toll. So keep both of those because of the pain. Keep Cheryl and Kelly in our prayers. Robin, I think I saw Robin on a while ago. Robin Hazard, is that her brother or her brother-in-law? Brother-in-law. We said last week he had pancreatic cancer, and it resurfaced, and that's just a very scary time. And I don't have his first name, but it's Robin's brother-in-law. Keep him in his prayers, and we need to get a name. I always think that's important. Phil and Cherie, every week, try and remember those names, and the same with Alton and Kathy. It's a similar need, different causes, but it's a hard time, and it's hard on the families. Who else do you have?
I think you got everybody.
87-year-old uncle.
Cheryl's 87-year-old uncle is having hip replacement surgery.
It's Jim Allen. I just saw up on the notice. The Robin's brother-in-law is Jim Allen, and that's good. But 87-year-old hip replacement. I think for him, we should pray that he'll do his physical therapy. Have the motivation to get up and do that. We remember these, and we're living more and more, I think, in a time where people maybe need to pay attention to signs like they did all that time ago in the New Testament. So I don't know, maybe it's being bold enough to say that. And
Mary Lee wrote this morning, Mike is having hip replacement surgery too.
Mary Lee Winterstein was with us last week. Her husband Mike, I just learned, is having the hip replacement when?
This week, Tuesday, I think.
They're handing out replacement joints like it's, we're selling shoes or something. But keep these, try and remember to keep these in your prayers.
What
We need
about
to
Jack
spend that
Bogle?
time. What's that?
What
What
about
about
Jack?
Jack Bogle?
Well, I leave that up to Jack, what he, can you get that? Hold on,
Try.
look, when it does that, it has shifted to 2. And you just click it to 1.
Okay.
Leave that up to Jack and Laura, what they, the good
You
news
want to say
is,
something? Do you have a mic?
I'm not sure, you don't have to.
I'm doing fine. Everything's coming along just good. There's no cancer, so.
They found no cancer. That's good news. So. Yes, for me. And I got some rest last night. I'm actually feeling like I can remember my name and everything today. Should be better. God, in such a small group, we have so many that we're concerned about. We have so many people that we want to lift up in prayer, and it's amazing with this small group. I start to wonder if the whole world is living like this, and we just don't know. And God, it says a lot about the position you've put us in to be that light, to bring your light, and we're so concerned about ourselves. Use it. Help us remember that there are so many other people out there, that we do have a place to bring that comfort that we look for. And that doesn't mean that we look to any other source for comfort but you. And for all of these, healing is always the thing we want. We know there's a limited amount of time, but during the time that we have, we're always bold enough to say we'd like the health that lets us carry your word and your grace to others. We study so that we can understand more about our relationship with you, to do better with our relationship with other people. Be with us and help us do that. Amen.
Okay, so we are in our second week of a 4-week study on the Passover. And so where we left, what we did last week is we looked at the first Passover, which was written about in Exodus 12, where God told Moses in very specific terms how to prepare and eat the Passover meal. And today what we're going to do is look at the other references of the Passover in the Old Testament. And there are 5 references of peoples during the Old Testament time celebrating or remembering or doing the Passover meal. That does not mean it was only done 5 times during that whole time. These are the 5 times it's talked about in the Old Testament, and we're going to go through those. Do you want to say anything? Or?
Real quickly, this has come up a whole bunch of times lately. We sometimes say things in here that are different than what you may have been taught. And I get a lot of questions. I get stuff online from people. A long time ago, early church, when this was all, they were just spreading the word, it's exploding out. There were a lot of people who thought that the message, Jesus' message, his instructions were too simple. Can't be that simple, right? And it's historical. I mean, we know this for a fact. And so some of them even went so far as to start looking for other gospels. There must be something else hidden from us, because it can't be this simple. And it's written about. I mean, it's written about in Timothy. It's written about elsewhere. They started getting out into some kind of crazy stuff because they wanted to find something that required them to do something, follow the magic rituals. And they just couldn't accept that it was this simple. And often when we study, and us, I mean, worldwide, there's a tendency for people to want to look for hidden things that are hidden from us. And so the first thing, I'm going to read something. This comes from Deuteronomy. But it says the secret things, the hidden things belong to the Lord our God. And I'm saying this because I never any week go looking for anything hidden. What we're trying to do is to talk about what's actually there, that we know is there. And there's so much of that, I don't know how we get to hidden. And there is, by the way, this idea of wanting to find hidden things, there's a word for things that are hidden, for things that are kind of mystical and hidden from us. It's occult. That is the word, the hidden things. And we're warned about looking for hidden knowledge. So this thing in Deuteronomy, I'm going to read it again. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever, so that we may follow all the words of this law. And there's a tendency to go looking to make things more complicated. And there may well be things that are hidden in there that I'm not capable of seeing. But a lot of the time, what we find is it tells us what we need to know. It's just there. And it's no more complicated than that. And if it sounds like a little bit, of a sidetrack, it is, but because we're dealing with the Passover and our communion, it's sort of, something that's worth paying attention to. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. When things are hidden from us, from the scriptures, more often than not, they've been hidden by people. They have been misrepresented to us in a way. And Mario's got to look. I'm going to give you an example, just for that look about things being hidden. This is 2 Chronicles 34. Deuteronomy is in little tiny print. It's 29:29. And I know this is off topic, but it's gonna play a part in what we're looking at today. There's a lesson here. But how many of you have heard all of your life that women are sort of left out in Christianity and have been, right? I mean, it's a common theme. And they're disrespected and they're disrespected, they're on and on and
Especially
on.
in the Old Testament.
And especially in the Old Testament. That's what we grew up being taught. That got drilled into me so much that I'm apologetic for it, right? This is 2 Chronicles. And there's been since I don't want to get into the whole story, but there's been something they've done really, really wrong. And the king finds out that they've done this thing. And he tears his clothes. He weeps. He realizes they have abandoned Yahweh, right? And this, out of 2 Chronicles, this priest goes to the king and explains it to him. Well, anyway, when they realize how badly they've messed up, the king sends this high priest, basically, the priest and a delegation of other priests. And they go to someone known as the prophetess Huldah. Now keep in mind, this is 1,500 years before Jesus. And the king realizes they have a problem, and he sends priests to a prophetess. You get what I'm saying? She's a prophet of the Lord. It's a woman, and nobody's apologetic for it. And they go, the king and the high priest seek the counsel of a woman. Now, that doesn't add up with anything you've been taught, because we've been taught women have no place in God's worship in the Old Testament. And here the king and the high priest are going to a prophetess named Huldah. And Huldah starts out, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says, that bold proclamation that I sort of envy and I'm also almost scared of. Thus saith the Lord. It's a woman in the Old Testament. And she is telling the king what's what. Tell the man who sent you, the king, she's pretty bold. This is what the Lord says. I'm about to bring calamity on this place and on its people because they've forsaken me. And basically the message is, you tell the king that because he tore his clothes, because he is truly sorry, that it's the calamity is not going to come in his time, right? He'll get to go to his grave in peace, but it's coming, and it does come. So my point is, before we go into any more of this on the Passover and how it relates to us, is that a lot of the things we feel like are hidden, you're going to see this today. There are things that are not hidden. We just never got taught them. We just never got told. And it's not that complicated. So with that, let's go into these Passovers. They only talk about them a few times and what they did with it.
Okay, so the first Passover, just, I'm a numbers person, so and I'm a date person. So they think it's about 1441 BC. So a year later, okay, so we're 1400 years before Jesus was born. A year later is the second Passover. Remember, the first Passover was Moses and his people are finally leaving Egypt after 400 years. The second Passover takes place in, they're not to the promised land, they're getting to the promised land. So we are in Numbers 9, verses 1 through 14. In the first month of the second year after Israel had come out of the land of Egypt, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai. The Israelites are to observe the Passover at its appointed time. You are to observe it at the appointed time at twilight on the 14th day of this month in accordance with its statutes and ordinances. So Moses told the Israelites to observe the Passover, and they did so in the wilderness of Sinai at twilight on the 14th day of the first month. The Israelites did everything just as the Lord had commanded Moses. But there were some men who were unclean due to a dead body, so they could not observe the Passover on that day. And they came before Moses and Aaron that same day and said to Moses, "We are unclean because of a dead body. But why should we be excluded from presenting the Lord's offering with the other Israelites at the appointed time? Wait here until I find out what the Lord commands concerning you," Moses replied. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, when any one of you or your descendants is unclean because of a dead body or is away on a journey, he may still observe the Passover to the Lord. Such people are to observe it at twilight on the 14th day of the second month. They are to eat the lamb together with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They may not leave any of it until the morning or break any of its bones. They must observe the Passover according to all the statutes. But if a man who is ceremonially clean and is not on a journey still fails to observe the Passover, he must be cut off from his people because he did not present the Lord's offering at its appointed time. That man will bear the consequences of his sin. If a foreigner dwelling among you wants to observe the Passover to the Lord, he is to do so according to the Passover statutes and its ordinances. You are to apply the same statute to both foreigners and the natives of the land."
So there's a whole bunch in there. First of all, they head out of Egypt. They're gone a year. And when it's getting close to the time, year, Moses is instructed that your people are supposed to observe this Passover every year. And you got to do it according to these statutes. The idea is to never forget. Personally, I think we have gone a long way towards letting future generations forget to remember things like the Holocaust. when we don't remind them, when we don't teach the next generation, the horror of it goes away. And there are a lot of young people who, some of them even doubt that it happened. A lot of them have been taught. The idea behind this observance is for them to never forget and never let their children forget that they were rescued, they were delivered by the hand of God in this very spectacular way. And so it comes up on a year, and Moses gets this instruction: you need to observe this every year. Well, and you need to observe it the way I've taught you, so you don't just start mixing in stuff out of convenience. And so there's some people who have encountered a dead body. And when you touch a dead body, when you encounter something like that, you're not ritually clean. You can't go to the temple until you've spent some time in purification. And they come and they say, hey, that doesn't seem fair that we don't get to observe the Passover with all of our people. Now, it's not like a kid saying, you know, like a sick day from school or a snow day. Oh, yay, I get out of having to do this. This is the opposite. This is something where they've got obligations, but they're going, we want to do this to be part of it and be part of our people. And it doesn't seem fair that we can't do it. And Moses, instead of just cooking something up, says, I got to go talk to God about this. I'll be back. That's a pretty good lesson in there. And he comes back and says, okay, this is what I got. If this happens, and I want you to see what's beautiful about this, because the story that we get told is that God is always looking to trap us and trip us up on some little technicality. Thank you. That's the word in the law. The idea is to put as many stumbling blocks in front of us as possible. And they come back and say, well, you know, this is a real thing. People encounter dead bodies, and we know you don't want us to totally abandon that. And that's the answer. Tell them to come back, go through the purification, and on the same day, the 14th of the next month, they do it. But you tell them to do it exactly the same way. They're not going to say, okay, this is sort of a makeup Passover. Let's have a little of this and a little of that, and that'll be it. No, because the point in this is the remembrance. The whole point in this is the remembrance, and this statute is designed for that purpose, to keep the message intact. So he makes a provision for people. We understand it's a complicated world. He says, fine, you do it on the second month. We don't see anything that says, oh, and by the way, if you're not ritually clean the second month, just do it the third. You know, if you know it's coming, unforeseen things happen, there's a way for you. But it doesn't mean that's just an excuse not to observe the Passover and not to prepare for the Passover. So we see in this way that in this, you know, difficult place, these people still get to be a part. But then there's another one that says, if a foreigner among you wants to join in, and how many times in this class have we pointed out references, even back in the Old Testament, where it says there's a way open for Gentiles, there's a way open for non-Jews. It just keeps coming up, doesn't it? And if it comes up that much, you've got to start to figure there's something to this. This story that they spun, that they're elite and nobody else has access to God, they made up. And what he says about a foreigner is, he says, they get to do this. They're told elsewhere that the person needs to be circumcised. This person has to make an active choice to join himself or herself to God's people. But if they do that, they're told, you let them observe the Passover, and they become joined to the people just as if they were born into the nation of Israel. The outsiders become
Insiders.
insiders. Now, that's the model that we keep getting. That goes all the way through to Jerusalem, to Jesus' sacrifice, to the atonement for us, that once again, it's open to everybody. You make an active choice to be a part of it, but it's as simple as that. And that's what he says. They become just like people who were born into it. There's no, what did Paul say? There's no Jew or Greek. There's no slave or free. There's no man or woman. It's all the way back here. It's all the way going on back at the Passover. That's why these things are so similar.
Okay, so now we're going to move 40 years forward. We're on the first Passover in the Promised Land. Remember, it took them 40 years to get from Egypt back to the Promised Land. Moses dies. He doesn't get to go into the Promised Land. Joshua gets to go into the Promised Land and leads the people. So we're on Joshua 5, verses 6 through 11. And it's the next time that a Passover is mentioned. So, for the Israelites had wandered in the wilderness 40 years until all the nation's men of war who had come out of Egypt had died, since they did not obey the Lord. So the Lord vowed never to let them see the land he had sworn to their fathers to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. And Joshua raised up their sons in their place, and these were the ones he circumcised. Until this time, they were still uncircumcised, since they had not been circumcised along the way. And after all the nation had been circumcised, they stayed there in the camp until they were healed. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." So that place has been called Gilgal to this day. On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while the Israelites were camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, they kept the Passover. The day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate unleavened bread and roasted grain from the produce of the land.
So the original Passover, and I hope this isn't too tedious. I hope, you know, it's not too dry, but on the original Passover, you remember the men were told to be dressed and have their staff in their hand. There had been other plagues, and he didn't tell them to do that. God knew they were leading up to being the rescue, right? But on this one is different. This time he says, Pharaoh's going to listen to you, and it's going to happen, and it's going to happen fast. You need to be ready. You know, when your deliverance comes, you need to be ready. So now they're about to go across into what, you know, we call the Promised Land, and it has been promised. It was the birthright. And Joshua, you know, they're like at the river, and it appears that while they've been out of Egypt, they haven't even been circumcising their children. They have abandoned a lot of the statutes. And apparently they haven't been observing the Passover like they should. And there's more reasons for me to say that. It's going to come up in the next example that Mary has. But Joshua says, hey, you know, we're about to cross this river and go conquer this land that was promised to us. And the funny thing is, the original Passover, it was the night before they're going into action. And this is right as they're about to go into action. And Joshua says, you know, it probably would be wise for us to remember how we got here. And they circumcise all these grown men now. They haven't been doing it, and they haven't been observing Passover. And this was handed down as a statute, as a law, and they abandoned it. These are the same people. Yes, sir.
So this night, right before they're going into the promised land, happened to fall on the second month, the 14th day.
It does say on the 14th. Yeah, it spells it out. But what was I going with that? Joshua was Yeah, but I think the point I want to make here is that they had abandoned this. And Joshua says, yeah, we should probably take care of this before we ride in on this next part of this, of this journey.
Okay, now we're going to go to the third instance, and this is 700 BC. So it's 700 years later. So what has happened? They've been in Israel, and remember, all of a sudden they had judges, and then the people said, "Hey, we want kings like everybody else." And God says, "You really don't want kings." And they said, "Yeah, we really want kings." And so God says, "Okay, we'll give you kings." And this king thing didn't work out so good. Remember, we had bad kings mostly. Every so often we had a good king. They turned away, they hardened their hearts, then they unhardened their hearts for a while. And so this has been going on. We're on 700 BC, and we have a king called King Hezekiah. And he was one of the, so we are going to be in 2nd Chronicles chapter 30, verses 1 through 19. So we've got King Hezekiah, and he's one of the good guys. And he has followed a whole bunch of bad guys. And so he is now king. So I'm going to read starting in 2nd Chronicles chapter 30. Okay. Then Hezekiah sent word throughout all Israel and Judah. And he also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh, inviting them to come to the house of the Lord in Jerusalem to keep the Passover of the Lord, the God of Israel. For the king and his officials and the whole assembly in Jerusalem had decided to keep the Passover in the 2nd month, since they had been unable to observe it at the regular time, which was the 1st month, remember, because not enough priests had consecrated themselves and the people had not been gathered in Jerusalem. This proposal pleased the king and the whole assembly. So they established a decree to circulate a proclamation throughout Israel from Beersheba to Dan, that the people should come to keep the Passover of the Lord, the God of Israel, in Jerusalem, for they had not observed it as a nation as prescribed. So the couriers went throughout Israel and Judah with letters from the king and his officials, which read, "Children of Israel, return to the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, so that he may return to those of you who remain, who have escaped the grasp of the kings of Assyria. Do not be like your fathers and brothers, who were unfaithful to the Lord, the God of their fathers, so that he made them an object of horror, as you can see. Now, do not stiffen your necks as your fathers did. Submit to the Lord and come to his sanctuary, which he has consecrated forever. Serve the Lord your God, so his fierce anger will turn away from you. For if you return to the Lord, your brothers and sons will receive mercy in the presence of their captors and will return to the land. For the Lord your God is gracious and merciful. He will not turn his face away from you if you return to him." And the couriers traveled from city to city through the land of Ephraim, Manasseh, and as far as Zebulun, for the people scorned and mocked him. Nevertheless, some from Asher, Manasseh, and Zebulun humbled themselves and came to Jerusalem. Moreover, the power of God was on the people of Judah to give them one heart to obey the command of the king and his officials according to the word of the Lord. In the 2nd month, a very great assembly gathered in Jerusalem to celebrate the feast of unleavened bread. They proceeded to remove the altars in Jerusalem and to take away the incense altars and threw them into the Kidron Valley. And on the 14th day of the 2nd month, they slaughtered the Passover lamb. The priests and the Levites were ashamed, and they consecrated themselves and brought burnt offerings to the house of the Lord. They stood at the prescribed post according to the law of Moses and the man of God. The priests sprinkled the blood which they received from the hand of the Levites, since there were many in the assembly who had not consecrated themselves. The Levites were in charge of slaughtering the Passover lambs for every unclean person to consecrate the lambs to the Lord. A large number of the people, many from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Zebulun, had not purified themselves, yet they ate the Passover, contrary to what was written. But Hezekiah interceded for them, saying, "May the Lord, who is good, provide atonement for everyone who sets his heart on seeking God, the Lord, the God of his fathers, even if he is not cleansed according to the purification rules of the sanctuary." Whew.
Now it gets weird.
Yeah, there you go.
And one of the things we said last night, we've been studying stuff, is that maybe a good question to ask today is this even worth studying? Is there anything about these old Passover things that matter to us today? And, you see the parallels. You see that the original was there to be an exact model for what happens with Jesus in Jerusalem. And yeah, there are things for us to learn. But here, one of the things you see, they were supposed to have kept this remembrance and kept it pure. And they apparently have just stopped. If there's some people still doing it, it's not said, but as a nation. So what's happening is they wanted kings. As Mary said, we want to be like all the other cool nations. They all have kings. When do we have a king? And they eventually just go. So God says, you know what? You're going to regret it, but we're going to start from Saul. And the kings, as happens with humans, and here's where it becomes something that we need to think about. The kings decide, what do I need with God? I'm a king. I don't need this. And they actually, a number of them begin making sure their people don't observe a lot of these statutes, a lot of these observances. They lead their people away from the worship of Yahweh. And it has gotten so bad that the day to observe Passover has come and gone, and they didn't do anything about it. Oh, you know what? I forgot it was our anniversary. I didn't even get you a card, right? We just didn't do anything. And somebody picks up on this, as well as the king, and says, hey, we really should get back to observing Passover. And since the 14th of Nisan has passed, and all of our people are not ritually clean. Oh, and our priests are not even prepared. They couldn't, says they couldn't do it on the 14th. They didn't have enough priests. Forgot that part. They didn't have enough priests who were ritually pure, so we can't do it. Don't you think we should? And since there's a provision to do it on the second month, they say, hey, let's go ahead and do it. And everybody says, yeah, but what do they discover? They haven't done this in long enough. The people aren't ritually clean. They can't do it. They finally have some priests. So what this is all leading up to is, remember how this was supposed to be done. It was supposed to be done in your home with family, right?
With your neighbors.
You slaughter the lamb yourself, and you do this, like as Mary said, with family, with neighbors. All of a sudden, they have no way to celebrate Passover. They haven't prepared for it. And so they make this decision that since the priests and Levites have purified themselves, we're going to let them sacrifice the lambs on behalf of the people who can't, right? They changed the rules of Passover because it's practical. And the Jews, if nothing else, are practical, pragmatic people. And so they just say, it's better we should do this and not follow the rules than to not do it at all.
Well-meaning.
Well-meaning. I really think, I read this and I think, probably the best of intentions. And maybe since there's nothing else to be done this year, but don't make that same mistake next year, right? Get back, you have the instructions, and they didn't. And this appears to be when it begins to break down, when they just change the rules, and now the priests do all the slaughtering. And there's another reference. What is that one?
We're gonna, the fishing guide.
What about it?
Oh, you were gonna say.
What is it? I don't remember.
No, I just.
No, there are, I remember what it was now. I was gonna say, people hire fishing guides, right? And on some of these corporate outings, the fishing guide baits your hook, cast your line, set the hook, then Mario's back. You've been on some of those, and reel it in, get in, fillet it, clean it, package it, and they tell you whether or not you had a good time, right? It's just, they do it all for you. That's what Passover turns into. This is one of the points that I want to try and make you understand. They turned Passover in, they reinvented it. They turned it into something it's much more convenient if the Levites sacrifice your lamb for you and butcher it and everything else. All you do is take the rack of lamb home and barbecue it. That's great. That's what they did. We humans have had a really bad habit of doing these kinds of things, especially if they're more convenient, right? I can't name anything because I don't want to alienate any more people than I have to. But we have done that. We have changed things that are pretty clear in the scriptures just to make them more convenient. And
Well,
that's,
when we were talking, one of the examples, I don't think we insult anybody in particular on this one, is the idea you hear people say, oh, I tried this new church and I really didn't get anything out of it. Like church is somehow supposed to be entertainment rather than you putting something into it, and that it's a worship. This idea started way back then. Like I said, King Hezekiah, and that's one of the reasons I like to study the Bible different ways. Study it all Second Chronicles, but right now we're studying all the incidences of the Passover, and you find out, because if you read this, you like, King Hezekiah was a good guy. He was one of the good guys, and he wanted to bring the people back to Yahweh. And he was well-meaning, but there's no evidence that after this he ever got up there and said, we did it this way this time. Next year we're going to do it on the 14th of the first month, and we're going to do it back in the houses, and we're going to do it the right way.
this is never going to happen again. And that's not what he did. And that I think turns into a problem. One last thing though, I want you to notice. When they decide, we've gotten away from this, and we should reinstitute it, he sends out messengers all over the country. And it says that God touched people's hearts, but they were very receptive. You find is there are people out there who, given the opportunity, want to take part. If they're, they were offered, they said, look, we're going to go back to observing the Passover. And it says that a great crowd, a whole bunch of them, showed up in Jerusalem. We also find that just like Elijah runs off to a cave because he says, I'm the only one left. It's just me. And in this case, we've got some people on the line but it's just us. Nobody else cares. It's never just us. We're never alone. It's never just us. And when the word went out, nobody had been saying, let's get a petition together that we start observing Passover again. But when offered the opportunity, they respond in big numbers. And that's a thing to keep in mind, is that we sometimes tend to feel like we live in a place where I don't know, people don't act like they believe in God, even, much less some of these things. We're not alone. Given the opportunity, God calls people, touches their hearts, and they come. And so part of that is giving people the opportunity. That's a big part of it. But also part of it is not feeling like because we're alone, there's no point even trying. It's just us. You know? We never see that. We see so many examples that that's not the case.
Okay, the fourth example, we are now 90 years past, so we're in 610 BC. Last time was 700 BC. This is 610 BC. We're on another good king, King Josiah, and we're on 2nd Chronicles chapter 35. Then Josiah celebrated the Passover to the Lord in Jerusalem, and the Passover lamb was slaughtered on the 14th day of the first month. He appointed the priests to their duties and encouraged them in service of the house of the Lord. To the Levites who taught all Israel and were holy to the Lord, Josiah said, "Put the holy ark in the temple built by Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. It is not to be carried around on your shoulders. Now serve the Lord your God and his people Israel. Prepare yourselves by families in your divisions according to the instructions written by David, king of Israel, and Solomon, his son. Moreover, stand in the holy place by the divisions of the families of your kinsmen and lay people, and by the divisions of the families of the Levites. Slaughter the Passover lambs, consecrate yourself, and make preparation for your fellow countrymen to carry out the word of the Lord given by Moses." From his own flocks and herds, Josiah contributed 30,000 lambs and goats, plus 3,000 bulls for the Passover offering for all the people who were present. His officials also contribute willingly to the people and priests and Levites. Hilkiah, Zechariah, and Jehiel, and the administrators of the house of God, gave the priests 2,600 Passover offerings and 300 bulls. Additionally, Coniah and his brother Shemaiah, and I'm killing these names, and Nathaniel, as well as Heshabiah, Jael, and I should had you read this, and Josabad, officers of the Levites, donated to the Levites 5,000 Passover offerings and 500 bulls. So the service was prepared, and the priests stood in their posts and the Levites in their divisions according to the king's command. And they slaughtered the Passover lambs, while the priests sprinkled the blood handed to them, and the Levites skinned the animals. They set aside the burnt offerings to be given to the divisions of the families of the people to offer to the Lord, as it is written in the book of Moses, and they did the same with the bulls. They roasted the Passover animals on the fire according to the regulations, and they boiled the other holy offerings in pots, kettles, and bowls, and quickly brought them to all the people. Afterwards, they made preparations for themselves and for the priests, since the priests and the descendants of Aaron were offering up burnt offerings and fat until nightfall. So the Levites made preparations for themselves and for the priests and the descendants of Aaron. The singers, the descendants of Asaph, were at their stations according to the command of David, Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun, the king's seer. And the gatekeepers at each gate did not need to leave their positions because their fellow Levites were made preparations for them. So on that day, the entire service of the Lord was carried out for celebrating the Passover and offering burnt offerings on the altar of the Lord, according to the command of King Josiah. The Israelites who were present also observed the Passover at that time, as well as a feast of unleavened bread for 7 days. No such Passover had been observed in Israel since the days of Samuel the prophet. None of the kings of Israel ever observed the Passover like the one that Josiah observed with the priests, the Levites, all Judah, and the Israelites who were present, and the people of Jerusalem. In the 18th year of Josiah's reign, this Passover was observed.
That's a lot of reading.
Sorry.
So once again, as a nation, they've just gotten away from Passover. A whole bunch of other things too. And they actually get told several times through prophets, you guys have abandoned the Lord. and it's going to cost you. Yeah, I mean, there's going to be ruin brought down on you for what you've done. And they're hard-hearted. They get consumed with the fact that they're important, powerful people. They're kings. And you know, the prophets get sent, and often they beat or kill the prophets. We don't want to hear your message. And so someone comes along like Josiah, and he says, you know, they go back and look at the Torah, and they say, oh my gosh, we haven't been doing what we're supposed to do. Let's do a Passover. And the truth is, they really don't know how. They don't know how to do it properly. Being a king, he says, well, if we're going to do this, let's make a big production of it. And so once again, they invent their own Passover. And what I hope I can do is to try and remind you the original Passover in Egypt. These people are beaten down, they're you know, abused, they're repressed, but also it's their time to leave. Okay? It's their time for deliverance. Remember how they got there? Remember Jacob winds up going down, yeah? Or Joseph, I said, goes down and becomes advisor to Pharaoh. And they get sent to this Goshen that's perfect for cattle herders. They're in paradise. Why would they leave? There's nobody to mess with them. We have access to land. Our flocks were getting, you know, large and powerful. Why would they ever go back to Israel? We do that. We get comfortable in our ways. They've been told it was always the plan that they're going back to Israel. It was always the plan. How put yourself, just forget that what this is about. How would you get people to leave a place that they really like? It's not that easy. And that's where they are. And so what you see is that as they you know, we get the term birthing pains several times through the Bible, but as this begins to mature, part of what gets them out of there is the Egyptians start treating them really badly. The life becomes bitter. Now all of a sudden, we'd like to leave, please. When they first got there, nobody wanted to leave. My gosh, there's a famine in Israel, and down here we've got everything. So this idea that life got bitter for them, you think, well, why would God allow that to happen? Well, how else would he get them back where they're supposed to be? What we think of as a punishment often is not a punishment. I've told you that it's the exact amount of force that it takes to get us to move from where we are to where we need to be. And we see that in this story. So going back to that original one, these people are huddled up in their little, you know, stone places. We've seen some, I mean, they're little tiny places. And they do this meal as a family, or maybe with neighbors. And they go select a spotless lamb, which those aren't the ones you normally call out of the herd. Those are the ones you leave to breed. And they do this, they go through all the preparation. And they're told, tonight, God delivers you. And they do it as a family. Right? What Mary just read to you is now they've decided, you know, we haven't been doing this, so let's do a really good job of it. So they set up
30,000.
our armies of Levites and singers and a choir. It was a Hollywood production. Compensation. They turned it into something that said, I know God had a plan for this, but I think we can do better.
And remember, they took in the first prescription, they said the ordinances, it was, you know, do a lamb and bitter herbs and unleavened bread. And now we've got bulls, and they told them not to boil anything. They're boiling some stuff. I mean, they're not following the rules at all.
You boil pieces that you can't really put over a fire very well, because this is now a feast. What I'm trying to show you is they have turned it from this family gathering in anticipation. It's a beautiful thing. They've turned it into this, it's all-star weekend with the NBA. I mean, it's just one big overproduced mess.
And I want to get to the last one. King Josiah.
You're now a Levite. You've left the road, you're not following the original orders from God, how to do Passover. Where are the people, what regiment in the nation have to keep the people in touch? Like weekly mass, like regular feast holidays with the priests involved? Or do they just leave all of them and then they're going to preach it, also give up? And now you've got years and years and years of no observation, and no celebration. Everybody has forgotten. Now we have a production of a holiday.
Yeah, it's really that simple. It's not like there are no people who remember the original Passover, but what you're saying, largely they have lost touch. Notice that when this Passover is about to happen, the king donates how many sheep?
30,000.
30,000. And the Levites, you notice that the priest and the Levites, okay, here's one more point we can make. The priests have grown rich. They didn't get a share when everybody went into the promised land. Remember, they've gotten rich.
Right.
They were, but they've gotten rich.
Yeah.
And they have proliferated to the point, like I say, that they're just armies of them. That has to be supported. And they certainly haven't been earning their keep by doing Passover observances. They've fallen away. And rather than keep it completely clean, they've fallen away.
But, if you,
Yeah.
They're running their own show, even at the detriment of the lowly people, shepherds and all those guys. And they've gotten rich.
Yeah.
Now, 30 pieces of silver is nothing.
That's the corruption that we talk about. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that is what has happened. They have
but
become.
on this one, and we have one more to read and we're at time, but remember, King Josiah was a good guy. He was someone who believed that Yahweh was God, right?
Good point.
He was a good guy. King Hezekiah was a good guy. So even, and their idea of getting back to Passover was remembering Passover and celebrating it was a good idea, but they didn't do it the right way.
It should have been a spiritual service, and now it's become something like compensation. We're going to compensate for all our wrongdoing for all of you.
Yeah.
And we're going to go a big party.
And we're going to show everybody that, yeah.
Service is lost in that big party.
Yeah, and and I know it's not lost with any of you. We keep doing this, you guys. I mean, this is not Old Testament 610 BC. I mean, it's now too.
And we're getting to that. That is the reason.
One more thing, and this one's short, but we're now 100 years. We're at 516 BC, and remember the Israelites had been carried off. Some of them, a lot of them, had been carried off to Babylon. They ended up living in Babylon for 70 years, and now they have just come back to rebuild, rededicate the temple in Jerusalem. And so we are now in Ezra 6, chapter 6, verse 19. And they are rededicating the temple. They have rededicated the temple. And like I said, I'm on verse 19. On the 14th day of the first month, the exiles kept the Passover. All the priests and Levites had purified themselves and were ceremonially clean. And the Levites slaughtered the Passover lamb for all the exiles, for their priestly brothers, and for themselves. The Israelites who had returned from exile ate it, together with all who had separated themselves from the uncleanliness of the people of the land to seek the Lord, the God of Israel. For 7 days they kept the feast of unleavened bread with joy, because the Lord had made them joyful and turned the hearts of the king of Assyria towards them to strengthen their hands in the work on the house of the God of Israel. That one was shorter. So the last time we hear of the Passover being celebrated, and it's not that it wasn't celebrated, but was 516 BC, when they were rededicating the temple after coming back from Babylon. And so next week, we're going to look at the Passover in the New Testament.
Yeah, it's important that we finally get to that. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that what this is about is us. And it is worth studying, because it is at the Last Supper, at that table, when they're about to, he hands the cup and he says, this is the new covenant in my blood. So the old observance is being patterned again in what he does. So it is worth understanding what was going on, what they were supposed to do. And it's worth looking at what they did. You notice Mary just read that this was after they've been hauled off to Babylon and they get to come back. And not all of them came back from Babylon. A lot of them decided, this Babylon's a pretty good place. They really did. I mean, I'm not being flippant. They really did. They said, we're just going to stay here. We're treated well. We have money. This is a, cosmopolitan place. But the ones who did return were hungry for this ability to worship Yahweh, to become Jews again. And the first thing they say is that it's just the perfect time. On the 14th of Nisan, we've all prepared. We're, the Levites are ready. We're going to do Passover. It was the first thing that they thought of when they finally began, reestablished. The only thing is, if you caught that, he has the Levites prepare the animals. He has the Levites do the sacrifice. You see how different that is from a personal participation. When the original Passover is done family by family and it's done in your home, how different that is to go down to the temple, or where the temple is going to be rebuilt, but to go down there and have somebody just provide it for you. This is the thing that began making me crazy about church, our modern day churches, is because people sit on pews and wait for someone to hear. Let me just hand this. Let me spoon feed you this. I'll tell you exactly how much you need to know, and then time is over and we quit. This is what had happened by the time that they come back from exile. They've institutionalized the idea that this is now a thing that gets provided. It gets almost forced on you by the Levites, and they changed. And this is going to affect Easter. This is going to affect what we talk about next week, because they changed what the purpose was, the meaning, the richness of it, and now it's a big feast that comes up. So we're going to hopefully get to that next week, because none of this means anything if it doesn't have a practical application.
And just a couple of things to remember. Remember, it's the 14th day of Nisan. That has been consistent. The other two things that go back and forth, or you have to keep in your mind, is remember the Passover was on the 14th day of Nisan, and then the next feast was the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and that was 7 days from the 15th for 7 days. And so sometimes, they interchange it, but it's the Feast of the Passover on the 14th of Nisan, and then 7 days, the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
No, that's all right. That's I think the last thing that I want to be able to get in on this, though, is that they've modified the Passover. And there's a lot of controversy over which day Jesus is killed which day he rises and everything else.
So there's some aha moments next week.
There's some aha moments, because what you're gonna see is that Jerusalem is celebrating the Passover the way these people did. They've turned it into a big festival. Jesus actually celebrates the Passover the way it was instituted. And because of that, there are some discrepancies. And we didn't know that. Neither Mary or I knew that until this study. We go, oh my gosh, he's not doing what everybody else in Jerusalem is doing. He's doing it according to the way it's supposed to be done. And it winds up with some discrepancies in the timing, as it should. So. God, our concern is, as we do this, is not teaching a history class, but in seeking your place and your will in our lives. And we want to understand that. We want to look at these words you've left behind for your plan for us, for your wishes for us, rather than finding ways to call for your blessings on things that are just our way of doing things. And the thing I ask for in this study, this time, for each of us, is that you open those doors, you open those revelations, that you really do have a plan for us, that we really are a part of it. And if we seek, we find. Help us to find. Help us to understand so that we can come more in contact with that life more abundant that you said is all you wanted for us. Be with us through the week. These ones that we pray for, keep them in all of our hearts. You know our concern. You know that when one of us hurts, the others feel it. And we do have a lot. And we have some that we dare to ask for healing, but we know that there's a daily life to give strength and comfort to carry on the work that we have. Be with us all through those weeks. Amen.
Thank you, guys. Good to see everybody. I hope you have a good week, and we will see you next week.
Thanks.
Have a great week, Mary.
Bye-bye.
Yes, have a good week. We'll see you this afternoon.
Yes, book club. Bye.
Have a great week,
Bye.
everybody.
What's her sign say?
God bless.
Okay, bye.